Hi and welcome to another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, the podcast that brings you the real stories from the people who've made it into some of the biggest and most aspirational in-house legal positions globally. I'm your host, Scott Brown. I am founder of Heriot Brown In-House Legal Recruitment, the business that powers this show, and I'm also a former corporate lawyer. On each episode, I hope to bring you unfiltered conversations with someone in a leadership position in-house. And these will give you an insight into some of the unscripted and honest chats that I have on a daily and weekly basis with some of the people in key executive leadership roles about what it really takes to help them build successful and fulfilling careers and teams in-house. We're going to be talking about strategic partnerships with business leaders, how you can have legal having a seat at the table function in the executive committee, and the key people and the moments that shaped each of our guest career paths, which is the most important thing for me. So this is where we're going to go beyond the CV and we're going to look at what it really takes to get into those positions, some of the luck that these people have had along the way and how they've made that and engineered that luck, and really what makes these fantastic leaders tick. So this sounds like something for you. Let's get into it. Welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law. On this week's show, I'm joined by Emma Moloney, and Emma has been amazing since I moved to the Netherlands a couple of years ago, introducing me to so many people in the in-house market out here. So I thought it was about time that Emma and I sat down and had a chat. Emma's looking at relocating, or is in the process of relocating back to the UK, back to London. She's held positions at Endemol Shine, at News UK, and prior to that had roles where she was contracting and really got to know the gaps that she had before stepping into a General Counsel position. So we talk about the benefit of contracting and seeing different perspectives and working in different organisations and upskilling in areas that you might have blind spots, and some super interesting stories of a really international career. So I'm excited to see what's coming next for Emma as she moves back to London, and I'll be sad to see her leave from the Netherlands. But without further ado, we'll dive right in. Hi Emma, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Scott.
Welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law. Great to have you on. We've been chatting about it for a wee while. Emma and I did frequent similar coffee shop.
I think we need to say cafe, given that we're in Amsterdam.
That's true, actually. I do. That slips. Sometimes when my when our admin assistant in the team is looking for a suitable place to meet for someone for a coffee, they're like, oh yeah, forget it's Amsterdam. So yeah, good correction. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a bit cold outside, but it's nice being in here.
Yeah, nice studio. Well, yeah, thank you. I've given a brief introduction as best I can.
Yeah.
But it'd be great if you could give us a bit of an overview of where you're at the moment and a bit of an oversight into that, please.
Yeah. So I moved to Amsterdam in 2016 for a job at Endemol Shine Group, which finished up in 2020, and I've been consulting since then. And I've been doing a couple of other things. So I'm creating a crisis training with a friend, Patrick Keegan, in London, and so we're hopefully got another one of those coming up. And then I've also got an Instagram now with tips and strategies for trying to thrive at work, and it's called In the New World of Work, and I'm having a great deal of fun with that. And I do quite a lot of coaching and mentoring as well. So it's a very plate of things. And the other thing we were talking about before we started was, and now I'm going to move back to London after 9 years here.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
nice.
Quite hard to give up. It's a very beautiful city, and as you know, it's very easy to get around, and it's very fun.
Yeah. How are you feeling about that?
I'm good, I think, but as we discussed, it's a little unsettling.
Yeah. Yeah, I've just moved. I've just moved house in Amsterdam, and it is still in the midst of boxes. So yeah, you've got to mentally prepare yourself for it. And imagine after 9 years, it's there's a lot of stuff to move on as well.
Yeah.
And you were in London before, so 9 years in Amsterdam, but in London for a time before that?
Yeah, and originally I'm a New Zealander, so I did my degree there, and then I trained in Australia, and then moved to London and had a couple of fun roles. Like my first GC role, I was quite young, National Geographic channel, and then worked at Sky and did, I think the most fun thing I did there was the big HBO deal that launched Sky Atlantic. And we went to New York, and I did pinch myself a lot, thinking, how did a New Zealander end up here? And then after Sky, I did a lot of other things as well. But after Sky, I worked at News UK, which is the newspapers.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. So lots to unpick and chat about in your lessons. Keen to get into that a little bit more. But in terms of you sort of spoke about the crisis management stuff you've been working on and the consulting around that. What does that entail?
So it was really Patrick and I were thinking about it because he and I at Endemol Shine were kind of the crisis team.
Right.
And I think one of the things I was laughing with my sister-in-law when she was a General Counsel about the things they don't tell you before you get promoted. And people don't talk about investigations or crisis management because a lot of it's done quietly. I mean, it may look like there's a lot happening in public, but there's a lot behind the scenes. So my personal view about crisis management is it's much better to deal with the emotion and the stress of it in a room with your peers to work out who's going to be good at it, because not everybody is. And also just to work through what your plan is. And how you can manage yourself. I mean, I've heard of one company, it was a telecoms provider, and they had a huge crisis, and they had an outage, and all their exec team were on their own network, so they couldn't get hold of each other.
Okay.
But that you have to sort of sit in a room for a while and actually sit down and think, how are we going to plan to actually have worked that out? So, I think that it's very good to do it ahead of time and also work out who's going to deal with it, because one of my experiences is if you quarantine the team, the rest of the business can keep going, because the problem is if someone's in their first sort of managing their first crisis, everyone will run towards the problem. But you need the business to keep going, and you can have quite a small team that just pulls in people as you need them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we train people around.
Nice.
And the wide range of stakeholders you have.
Yeah, and managing those.
Yeah.
And do you find is legal? Patrick's background is his.
He's a PR and comms, so we were a good fit. We worked really well together, which is why we've been having fun putting this together.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, keen to introduce you to Emma in our team on the community side. Perhaps maybe do a session with some people on that.
Yeah, it'd be fun
as well. It'd be really good fun. How do you think after? I guess, going into the pandemic crisis, every company is having similar issues to that, maybe at different scales and levels. Do you think as a collective group we're more accustomed to dealing with crises? I guess from my perspective, we had clients just we need to work from home now. Yeah, with at the drop of a hat, and some being set up more with the tech and everything that they needed, infrastructure, and others being less prepared. Do you feel as a collective there's more people are more attuned to handling crises? I think there's the pandemic, and I think that the thing about that is everyone had to cope with it at the same time. But of course, what you also saw is people and countries that acted quicker did better. Yeah. So I think there's that interesting thing about jumping in quite quickly. Yeah. And maybe not treating everything as a crisis, but being aware that something might turn into a crisis. That's one of the things Patrick and I talk about. And the other thing I think is everything's become so public now. And I think that's also added a whole layer that didn't happen before 10 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky time. And But I do think some of that advice that some of us got very early on in our careers, I know lots of people who got told this, but that whole sense that don't write anything or do anything that you don't want to see on the front page of the paper. And I mean, it's trite, and it wouldn't be a newspaper now. It would be, on an Instagram feed. Yeah. But I think that is a good way to
live. And you know, one thing that's also happened is people spend so much time on WhatsApp now, and the phone is a very useful thing to use in these situations.
Yeah.
Not to cover anything up, but actually to get a sense of something, to find out what's actually happening. And you and I, you'll do the same thing as me. You can hear things in people's voices that you can't read on an email.
Yeah.
Even if you know them well.
Yeah. No, 100%. And you can read the wrong thing into something written down as well.
And particularly when you're stressed, when you're in a high pressure environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm partial to passive aggressive email, so so it's not lost on me. All right, great. Well, we'll move on to lessons. If you could share the first lesson, please.
Yeah. So this is my obsession, and anyone who I've ever worked with will know this. But I do think when I've coached people for promotions, particularly promotions to very senior levels, I've always said to them, if you haven't done sort of something on difficult conversations, go and do it.
Okay.
I see so many of, you know, you'll have it a lot and your team will. People's frustrations with their managers and their jobs is often that people haven't had that difficult conversation with them, or they haven't been able to have that difficult conversation in their current role. And they're not easy, and they don't get easier, I don't think. You have to prepare, but you also have to be prepared to go there. And I think avoiding things, it doesn't help. And the other thing is we communicate so much without speaking, and so no matter what's happening, you'll be communicating something. So you're much better to use your words. I mean, I sound like it's like, you know, that's that toddler thing, isn't it? Use your words. But I mean, sometimes adults need to get
I've
reminded.
literally walked out the house to get to my son. Instead of screaming, could you use your words?
Yeah.
No, it's and yeah, I think we're, as you rightly said, in our job as recruiters, like you're sometimes having to give bad news or difficult news and have that difficult conversation, or ask questions that you don't want to know the answer to. I think that's, for me, that's the thing that is like, what do you not want to know? What would be the worst case scenario? Ask the question. Yeah. It's probably not going to be that. Yeah. But rather than bury it and hope, cross your fingers. And
I think it's true leadership too, because, and I really quite like Brené Brown. I love that Theodore Roosevelt quote that she sort of refound. It's quite a funny story how she found it, but it's too long for now. But she says, being clear is kind, and I also think that that's the thing about difficult conversations is actually being very clear what the situation is, and that's also when you're giving advice, not fudging it, and you can say this is really tricky or this is difficult, or
it's a good the good little openers to deliver it, the shit sandwich. So when do you remember a time that you realised that, or the first difficult conversation you embraced?
I think it was. You know, all of us, I think, when we get promoted to leadership positions, you just think, I won't do what I don't like. And I didn't like that. I didn't like where conversations were avoided, and I'd left at least one job because I just thought it's, you know, it's hard staying here because things aren't dealt with. But it's fine to have that intellectual understanding, but actually to do it is really, actually walking the walk is really tough. But that's where I think, you know, some sort of training or course or just, you know, reading some books, you just get some strategies. One of my favorites is actually sitting next to someone not like this. This is intense, right? Particularly if you're having a difficult conversation. But if you're sitting next to someone or even if you could walk with them, or it's so much easier because there's none of that. And that's why, you know, being in the car is such a great time to chat because you're next to each other.
That's good.
And it's a very simple strategy, but it's got me out of a few holes.
Right. I might use that one. Avoids the eye contact, I suppose, or feeling like you have to.
And also for the person, particularly if you're the one delivering the bad news, or I've assumed it's bad, difficult news. It's easier for you too.
I think it's, you have to put, another thing is you have to put yourself in the receiver's shoes there as well, and know that, well, we'd rather just hear it. You want, if you're in that position, you want, inevitably going to be in it or have been in it previously, that you always want to hear.
And I've been on the other end of those difficult conversations, and they are hard. But if someone treats you with respect and is prepared a little and makes it easier for you, you're so grateful, and actually it means the conversation goes better, and you can just be grown-ups and say, okay, that's the situation we're in.
Mm-hmm. It's weird human instinct, isn't it,
to avoid
that. It's so strange when it just logically makes so much sense when you will be on the other side of it, or you have been, and how would you want to be treated? But the best people still slip into it.
Yeah.
And in terms of if you're going in, which you have done, obviously going in and inheriting teams, how have you? Is there anything in terms of instilling that as a new boundary, or
definitely. I mean, I think the first thing in both the teams where I, as a general counsel, came in, or as a senior lawyer, the first time wasn't as a general counsel. First of all, doing a lot of listening, so not jumping in and assuming anything, because that's an easy thing as a leader to think you're the one who has to talk all the time, but silence and listening can be so incredibly powerful. And then creating a culture of feedback. But I think you have to start with positive feedback, so that you sort of have to start with actually giving people feedback that's positive and clear and also specific. But then definitely going to that where we're going to have tricky conversations and raise things so we can get rid of them rather than have them fester. Or ferment. Yeah.
Cool. And your first general counsel appointment, 32. You were 32. You said. How did that? How did you? That was fairly rapid rise to that position.
And it was at National Geographic Channel, so that company was being turned around, and then became kind of the huge entity that it is today. And it was of National Geographic Channel outside the US, so the rest of the world.
Okay. Were they is it Chiswick? Were they in Chiswick?
Not so glamorous, Brentford.
No. Okay, right.
on the Sky campus. But it was very fun, and it was a very exciting time to be doing that. And it was, I was. At first it was just me, and then the team grew, so that was really fun. And one of the things I did, which I've done ever since, is had away days, and we would go somewhere. And at that time was very glamorous. The last away day I had was in Miami, so Nice. I was pretty lucky.
Yeah. What do you try to when you're going on an away day or something like that? How do you? What's your objectives when you're
so it's an interesting question. One of the things I really try and do is not be too content-led, because I think that a lot of it, I think we get taught, and maybe not now, but certainly when I was doing a law degree, that was all about knowledge. But I think it's really about skills, and particularly as a general counsel, you're not going to know everything that comes across your desk. So you have to have the skills to be able to, manage a problem and work out how you're going to solve something or do something. But I like doing quite a bit about how we work, not what we work on. So, and also increase in my last few international away days at Endemol Shine, we also did mental health, but I knew that it was still quite a tricky thing. I didn't want to come straight out and say this is about mental health, but I thought it was important just staying healthy. So we did brain science, because brain science, I'd read a lot around it in the last 15 years, and I think it's quite interesting just to look at the science. And if you look at the science, you realize how you might want to work a little differently, or tweak how you work, or tweak how you treat yourself, or treat how you approach your day. And that those things can make a huge difference to how you do your job, and also how you feel at work. Yeah, and they were always fun. I always tried to get good providers, and also I just used to ask my friends, and often they had good suggestions because they'd been to something. Or I think I was talking to someone recently who's looking for a promotion, and I just said, are you interacting with your peer group? Do you go and see people that you like who've done deals with? And I said, I don't like networking. I don't like working into a room cold. It just doesn't suit me. But I do go and have coffee with people I know, and you just pick their brains, just like, what are you doing? Because everyone has different skills. Yeah.
I think it's
and it's nice. Stay in contact.
It's just keep in contact with people in similar positions or similar issues, and you don't know that unless you have the conversation. I think for me, like the legal conferences that people go to, the cold networking is difficult, but ultimately that's where the 4 or 5 connections that you make over that day or 2 days,
agreed.
those are the ones that are, that's what your takeaways are from that event, rather than the content. So the more of those you can make and jumping into it, I think, and remembering about your life, like people, there's everyone's in the same boat there.
Yeah, that's true too.
And making that reach out. In like those, I'm relatively interested in this because we had a AGM or an away day just before Christmas. And
I love how you call it an AGM. Very fancy.
It's James, our managing director, calls it that. Actually, I'm fine with away day. We'll brand it upwards. But it was around entrepreneurship and instilling like creative thinking. So we had someone in to talk around that and idea generations and. In the moment, brilliant. You're like, there's loads of juices flowing, and it's like, how do you bottle that and keep it going? It's constant like reminders. I think is I find challenging, not just to have it as which is great. It's the day and the energy's there, and there's no doubt unmeasurable, lasting impact. But how do you sort of go like we want to?
And I've got a different example, but hopefully relevant. That is. Often, particularly with a new team to me, doing some kind of insights training. So the colours, and I think they're really powerful. And in terms of, I think they're powerful in terms of explaining to people who they are in the way that they communicate, and also why with some people it's easier for them than others. And then, but one of the things I found myself doing quite often was when someone would be discussing an issue that they'd had with a stakeholder or client or a colleague, I'd say, but have you thought about what colour they might be? And I know, and on one level it's quite simple, but on another it's incredibly powerful, because that whole sense of, and that's using that, isn't it? Because I think without an away day and a shared experience and a shared language, it's very hard then to create a new culture. But to your point, it's that whole thing of, well, what would the idea generator say? Yeah. What would that?
We've sort of instilled a language of. It's like building ideas, and it's more powerful as having 2 people around an idea. So like we'll greenhouse some ideas, so like taking that language into the conversation rather than, and it opens the person to what if we did this, rather than but
oh,
this
I love that
but this doesn't work what we're doing. So I agree. Insights is great. We're sort of looking at doing it across the team as well. It's where do you sit on what colour?
I think it changes, but I had the same one as the General Counsel at Sky, and red and green.
Right.
And he said the funniest thing. I was laughing. He looked at me and went, right, so basically we're like, right, we're going this way. Please want to come with me? And I was howling with laughter. I'm like, that's so
It's good to just check yourself and be aware, isn't it? It's a bit reading the report,
but also there's self-awareness of that. And one thing I have to do, because I can be chatty in this scenario, but my emails are pretty blunt, because I'm just like, right, let's just do this. And that whole thing of thinking, oh, that person's green, and I force myself to add in, how was your weekend? How's the dog? How's the move going? But that's so important, because that person then feels a different experience from you as a manager or a leader. Yeah. But for me, it's not the first thing I write. I mean, big confession now, but yeah.
The yellow, the sunshine, sunshine orange. Yeah. It's nice to check yourself, definitely. All right, we'll move on to lesson 2.
So I've sort of already flagged it, but I think. I did a few interim, worked at a company doing interim roles, and one opportunity I got was to work on Kindle for Amazon when it was first, like there was only one Kindle in the whole of the UK, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. Oh, wow. So it was super fun. Like I went to the publishing houses. I mean, it was like, and they all thought I'd just arrived, so they were sort of trying to help me, which was very funny, but very lovely for me in terms of the negotiations. But I did think, you should just ask me how long I've been here. You know, they all thought I'd just got off the boat from New Zealand. But I realised from those roles that law isn't so much about content. There's a sense, people will say to you, but I've been here 20 years, and in institutional knowledge, it's very, very important. And it is. I'm not saying it's not. There is a definite value to that. But you can always learn things. Mm-hmm. And there's a really interesting interesting thing when you have a mix of institutional knowledge and new people saying, but why do you do that? Or what about this? And weirdly for me, some of my best experience came from being a construction lawyer way back. That's where I started in construction.
Right, I wasn't aware of that.
Right. And just it's very litigious.
Yeah.
Engineers are like the best clients I've ever worked with because they read through everything. They're very, very meticulous. Mm-hmm. We'd probably say some of them are quite blue, just to go back to our colours.
Yeah.
And it taught me a way of working. And also just they're very process driven, and that suits my personality and projects and planning. But I think that if you have a balance of both in a team, it's very healthy. So new people coming in aren't necessarily a threat, but sometimes their questions can be really interesting. And one thing I loved about getting younger interns and paralegals and junior lawyers in, because often in teams which haven't had much turnover, they don't have many young people. That's a diversity we don't talk about sometimes enough, I think.
Right.
Their first question, particularly with less interesting things, were how could they sort of use data and some kind of automation to make it more interesting. They weren't trying to get out of it. They were just trying to make it quicker so they could do other things. Mm-hmm. And I loved that.
Yeah.
Nice. And so having that different perspective. But so I don't think it's necessarily content. I mean, you have to know your things, but there's also your skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was a brand new product going to market. So
Kindle,
you
totally, amazing.
And how long was that project for you?
I think it was about a year.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty full on, lots and lots of contracts, and there was obviously the publishers, understandably, were a bit like, help, what is this new thing? Mm-hmm. And Amazon are pretty tough negotiators, as we can see.
Yeah.
But what was very interesting, after I think a couple of years, they worked out that actually people who had Kindles bought more books, not less.
Right.
So it's the interesting thing about life, that this huge existential threat, which of course it felt like.
Yeah.
Actually, they were finding that people were buying more books.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how Kindle. I don't. It's not that you don't see them widespread, but I guess they're sort of holiday reads, right?
Yeah.
And people have them tucked in their bag. Moving house, I've not got a lack of books, I can tell you that much. I've got boxes and boxes of books ready to put on a shelf if there ever is one gets put up. So there's been no existential threat that's followed through to books in my house anyway. So, like, on the I'm interested to chat about that. How did you make earlier in your career? So qualified into construction.
Yeah.
How did you, and then moving into media? So like junior construction lawyers would be like, what? How did that happen? I thought I'm going to go and work on JCT contracts.
Actually, I dropped out of law school in the middle because I found it a bit boring, and so I went to Sydney and I was waitressing, and then I thought I'll just write to the 10 largest law firms, and so I did. And then one of them wrote back, Allen's, which is a very great, very, very good law firm. Mm-hmm. And they said, please, can you be on the 59th floor? And I remember being totally terrified. I mean, I'd never been in a lift that high, New Zealand. I'm a bit scared of heights. But anyway, took a big deep breath. And so I was a paralegal on that year out. And then I went to London, and then it was snowing. And I just thought, oh, God, I'm never going to be able to afford anything if I work in a shop, which I was doing. So I went back to law school. And Alan's work, the partner I worked for, got me a summer job each summer while I finished my degree. And then he said, oh, would you like to work here? And I'm like, oh, yeah. Thinking, oh my God, that would be great. So he said, well, the condition is you have to do a year in construction first. Okay. And I'm like, okay. Right. So, and I worked for some very funny senior associates who were they were very kind, actually. And then I just said to someone, I'd quite like to come and work in media.
Right.
And they said, okay, it can be your second rotation.
Okay, right.
And then I got sent to work on the launch of Foxtel. in Australia. And so there was 13 people. So I was the junior lawyer for the head of legal and business affairs at that time.
Okay. Nice.
And I thought these people, and I thought about the television people because I thought I'd wanted to do film. And then the film people we were dealing with were quite full on. And I think I have, and then I went to Foxtel, and people laughed a lot and they were clever, and I thought, I think these are my people.
Right. And that was just a comment? Was that,
kind of, yeah. But I was based in the office, our office, which actually is a good way to do a secondment.
Right.
Had all the support.
Yeah. And when did you decide law firm wasn't for you? And
I kept getting sent on to secondment in both, and even when I came to London, I was on secondment, a sort of, again, in the office secondment. I decided not to take it as a hint that they wanted to get rid of me.
Glass half full.
Really try. But no, I think I just realised I liked that interaction with the clients, and I liked being in and also I really enjoyed being in a room with people who were trained differently to me. One of the things people don't talk about in-house so much is you're often with people who come from a not trained the same as you, so you've got all different kind of skill sets. And I also love the creative side of it. I'm quite creative, so being in a company that makes things is fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice.
Makes TV, yeah.
I've often wondered on the law firm side with the secondees, they must see people who are going to be naturally, like there's a purpose for sending a secondee, right, to enhance the relationship and build the relationship. And the junior lawyer might just think they're there to execute on the work, but they must be looking at people and going, like, you're great at black letter law, you're maybe not going to be right for the secondment, and vice versa. So there must be part of that, and it's partly the soft skills that no doubt have stood you so well in your time in-house as well. Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Just I hate how we call them soft skills, but I do too because there's no other word. But I think they're, it's interesting, isn't it? I think maybe we need new branding for that, but I agree. Life skills. Really. And I think, but I also think one of the partners I worked for in London, I think he also knew that actually we would become clients, which was smart. He just never got thingy, and I did use him as a lawyer, and I would ring him up, and I'd always know the answer because I worked for him, so I wasn't going to ring up and just say what's the answer. So I'd say this is the answer, and he's like, okay, I agree with you, and I'm like, okay, good, thank you for that. But it was a really good to have, and I think he was very aware, particularly in media, that in-house teams were growing, because we just talked about this, and that the way that his business would go forward is that he would have people work for him and hopefully do a good job, but then go and do something else and then brief him. Yeah, it was he's very smart, very entrepreneurial, because it wasn't so recently. Yeah, I think the best partners have that, right? And it's. He said, being able to spot that this is going to be a client. There's no downside. No downside here. Cool. Keen to ask, see, in that general counsel position, sorry, changing subject slightly. What's the hardest part that you don't know about before you're general counsel? What's the? I think when I said what we talked about briefly, I also think the investigations. Right. Yeah. Because I didn't really know that they happened, because they have to be quite confidential, not just for the company but also for the often the people involved. I found that really hard, and I remember being asked in my second interview for the GC role at News UK, what will you lose? And I said, I'm going to be lonely. Right. There'll be things I can never tell anyone. That's going to be quite a lonely experience. And it was interesting. They said to me, you've thought about that? And I said, yeah, because I think it's interesting. I often say to people with promotions, what are you going to lose? And some of them will say nothing. And I'm like, no, you will. You need to think through that ahead of time. That's really good advice. Because I think if you don't deal with it, that can drive you to other things to fix it. And some of those aren't great. So maybe oversharing with people, we've all seen that, and that's never good. Right. There are things that you can't tell anyone. Yeah, difficult. Yeah. Bite your tongue. And that was that, just chronologically, that was you'd held a general counsel role, so you knew a little bit. You knew what you would be getting into in that promotion at News UK.
Yeah,
as
but
well.
it was a much
bigger role.
we talked about different before we got on the thing, different levels. So the GC role at Nat Geo got bigger, but it wasn't. But this was a much bigger general counsel role. Yeah.
In a
Much bigger company.
in an organisation that goes back to not putting
definitely.
things in writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And quite an interesting time in its history. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Well, nice. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that's so useful for someone that's going into or looking for that step up into that role to know and sort of issue spot those types of things.
And my other big learning from that role, and the other thing I was thinking about for lessons learned, was it was quite a mindset shift for me to go from doing big commercial deals where you're going for the best possible outcome always, right? And not, I never believed in scorched earth. So it was about getting the best possible outcome for both companies, because particularly at Sky with the big content deals I was doing, they were long-term important relationships, and we also knew that we'd be on the phone asking for things, so there was no point upsetting everybody. You needed to be quite collaborative but still get a great deal for the company. But then I had to move to least worst.
Right.
You're making in certain scenarios you're looking at what's the least worst outcome, and that was such a mind and you just said glass half full. I'm quite optimistic, so to just sort of be comfortable around least worst was a big deal for me. But I think that's a huge mindset shift as you become more senior, because sometimes you just have to make the least worst decision.
Yeah, it's a different approach to risk, right? It's just like
totally, yeah.
And living with understanding the consequences of what the least worst situation, weighing those up.
And
if it's commercial or whatever cost. Yeah. Yeah.
Because obviously at the end of deals is sometimes, I mean, you're always often very tired, but there's the odd champagne, there's all these, and with least worst, it's just, okay. And
it's
we did
quite hard
best
for lawyers where you're taught right and wrong almost as well. And that's like there's a right answer or there's a right thing and a wrong thing.
And becomes so, I think, and that was another thing I saw that I think, law school can train you right and wrong, and there's black and white, and it just gets increasingly grey, and you'll find that in your role. Just as you become a leader, it becomes more grey, and you have to be happy in those shades, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
Otherwise nothing would get done, nothing would get pushed forward. Cool. We'll move on to lesson 3.
Okay. Oh yeah, well that was lesson 3.
That
Sorry,
was lesson 3. Sorry. Right. Let's say it again. We can. That was lesson 3.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyway, no, all
just
good.
segueing in least worst. Yeah.
Okay. So, so to summarise, was it lesson 3?
Yeah.
I thought your lesson 3 was no future.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Let's do that one.
Okay.
Then, there's no.
Yeah. Sorry.
Job,
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
No jobs for life, because then that just blended in quite nicely to lesson 2.
Okay.
Right, we can edit that out. Cool.
Okay. Cool.
So so if you could share lesson 3.
Yeah, I had when I was at Allen's and I was a paralegal, they had to make some redundancies, which had never happened before. So it was a long time ago, and it was at a time when lawyers didn't really get made redundant. But it was such an reminder for the rest of my career that no job's for life. And I think it's a very difficult process, redundancy, and it's happened to me a couple of times. So it's a very, very difficult process, but I think if you just go into any role and think it may not go on forever. And I always say to people when they're, going for a big job, I'm going to try and think of a word where I don't have to swear. I usually call it fuck off money, but it's good to have some money in an account so that you can leave if you have to, because, sometimes things do get tricky, and that's in any role in your life. And that freedom to be able to say, I have to go now for whatever reason. But I think it really stood me in good stead, because when things came to an end, even if it was a hard process, I just hadn't expected to be there for my whole life.
Yeah. And you've managed your expectations.
Absolutely. And I think I was talking about it last night at something, and people were talking about how it's for some people it's really hard to let go of a job because you become so defined by it, and I think that's always a risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of your, and you assume it as part of your identity as well, or it is that you define yourself by that.
Yeah.
How much of that has been steered through, because you quite not unique, but in terms of your like permanent positions with National Geographic, and then a period of time doing contract work and interim work, and then back into the Endemol Shine and ultimately Endemol Shine and News UK. I think some people think linear going into do contracting means that I'm probably shutting the door off to going into something or like a big permanent role, or vice versa. So
I really followed great work I wanted to do. Like I thought the most important thing was great work, and a lot of people at the beginning of that journey, sorry to use TV language, I think thought I was a little mad, but I remember turning up at one really good recruitment headhunter, and they said, we can see what you've been doing. You've been filling in your gaps.
Yeah.
And you're ready for this now. And I remember thinking, wow. And I have heard of other people people say to them, you've been there too long, because they'd got the memo years ago that you have to stay for a long time. And I think things do change. And I always say to people, one thing on my Instagram is like, make like a meerkat, like maybe once a year, look up and see where things are going, and also where things are going out in the zeitgeist, because things do change. Recruiting does change.
Yeah.
And I think having a narrative about why you did certain things, and why you chose certain things.
Yeah, you've got a story to tell. How am I gonna explain this? Or even if it's not everything you're setting out and taking steps purposefully, or like everything's pre-planned, but as long as you've got a narrative that you can stick to and that adds up to the story you're telling, then it works. And it's just reasoning, right? And the meerkat thing, I think is key. So many times we'll try and get in touch with someone senior level, and part of that's like we're looking at client outreach as well as looking at senior candidates, but you don't hear from someone for 5 years, and then at some point in time when they need you,
that's happened to me.
Out, and it's like, I'm looking for a new role, and you're like, well, didn't even speak to us the last 4 or 5 years, or acknowledge a receipt of an email, or and you.
I mean, no one is that busy.
No, I don't think so. And building and no outreach like that is so ill-judged. You're not getting in touch with people about
no, you're definitely not. You're definitely not a stalker.
Like that, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's the boots on both feet. I think, and we're service providers, so it's a difficult thing to say. Do you know what, you've made your hay? But I think building your network and maintaining the network when you don't need it is so important. I say it all the time.
I agree.
But yeah, because you're going to need it at some point, and that's not the time to be building it and always asking for something.
No, exactly. And also when life's stressful, it's a very different conversation than to have a coffee and say, hey, I'm a couple more years, and then and I think trying to be intentional. It's not always easy, but I remember taking a pay cut to go and do an interim thing, but I decided then I did 4 days, because I thought if I'm going to take a pay cut, I might as well do 4 days. And then I did some research about whether I wanted to be a lawyer anymore, and that research didn't turn into much. I did upholstery, and it's very slow, and I'm allergic to everything, and I went and volunteered in a hospital to see if I wanted to retrain as a doctor, and I found the environment quite low energy, and I thought, this doesn't suit me, and I'm like if I'd sort of sat and done any thinking about that, I would have realised it was low energy because people were sick. But I'd watched way too much ER. Right. But you know what happened after that is I thought, okay, well, what are the things I'm not enjoying? And I thought it's not creative enough. And I want to be more engaged with it. So I just made my job more creative, and I actually did it better. And it didn't mean, I didn't start painting things at work, but I used colour more. I thought really hard about my presentations. And so I think you can add things in, but it was through that process of having a bit more time, which I took a pay cut. And secondly, thinking this is a pause year and I need to just regroup and think about what's really next. And I think there's real value in pauses. I don't mean stopping, but just having a moment where of reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing those. That was great. Really enjoyed the conversation. For next steps in London, like if anyone's listening, what's like what are you looking for? If you don't mind sharing, or how can anyone help?
Yeah, so that's really kind to ask. So I've done a couple of sort of 2.5 years of consulting here and done my Instagram. I'm still going to do my Instagram. And probably looking for a role. So that's quite exciting. And I've spoken to a few people, including you. And just very interested to see what's out there. And it's been, again, it hasn't exactly been a pause because I've been doing some really fun things, and I've done a lot of coaching and mentoring, which I've really enjoyed. But it'll be nice to kind of get back into a role when I get back to London. But I need to sell my apartment first. Hashtag first world problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't feel too bad if you're on that front.
No, exactly.
And maybe fill your bank with some FU money with the proceeds. But yeah, and like you look at things that are contract or permanent things.
Either. I'm relaxed. I think just that whole thing of working with good people, interesting work. I like doing new things. Yeah.
Amazing. And with the crisis management and everything that's going on at the moment,
as well,
there's plenty of it just now. I'm sure for all companies that we don't see or hear about as well. So, wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can help.
Been
a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
So that wraps up another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, powered by Harriet Brown in-house legal recruitment. Now, I share these stories each week to help lawyers of all levels, and both in private practice or working in-house. And it doesn't matter if you're early in your career or you're already leading a team. Learning from your peers or from those who have walked in your shoes before, then this is the show for you. If you find it useful, I would love it if you could share it with your colleagues or share it with your network, or drop us a message just to let us know that you're listening and that you're out there. Feedback really helps us grow the show and take it in the direction that gives the most value to you, our listeners. So until next time, I've been Scott Brown. Thank you.